Right, we're going to start. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. My name's Ginnie Chadwych-Healey. I'm a sustainable fashion advocate and writer for the Sunday Telegraph, very much focusing on brands doing good or trying to do better. And there's hopefully a huge sea change going on right now and lasting for as long as we need it to before we start to see true results in terms of fashion's impact on the climate generally. And today we're basically celebrating Lady Bamford's acquisition of a merino flock of sheep right behind us, some of them right behind us, which will be the first UK-owned merino flock to be reared and then produced into garments, which will be available from November here in the UK. So it's a huge step for British farming and for the wool industry generally. I should say right now that I am not qualified in agriculture or farming. I just have a passion for fashion. So I'm here today joined by this great panel of speakers who I'll introduce shortly. But I want to make a point right now that this is very much news round, not news night. And we would love you to come up and ask your questions at the end and obviously take a look at what you can achieve with wool. So it's really to encourage you to reevaluate what you're wearing, what that fabric label says at the back of whatever you're wearing, and to not shy away from wool. I think we've got this sort of misconception of it being kind of coarse and scratchy and difficult to wear and shapeless, and that today we will prove is not the case. So I'm going to introduce, first of all, Leslie, here in blue, Leslie Pryor, who's a merino wool grower and owner of the Tellenby Merino Stud in Devon. And she is the guru. We're going to hear everything, no pressure. But Lady Bamford bought her flock from Leslie, so that's quite a kind of major part in this whole journey. And she's the custodian of the Beaumont flock, which we'll come to, shortly. And then we have Ruth Rand, who is founder of Herd, which is a sustainable yarn and knitwear brand. So she's doing both, producing yarn for brands to buy from her, many brands you might have heard of, and creating her own knitwear as well. And she's working in partnership with Bamford. And actually this piece nearest to us is a garment made in conjunction with Bamford and Herd yarn. So it's great to have Ruth here. And then finally, Julian Knight, who's a sustainability specialist at Bamford. So very much part of the design process and working in conjunction with the likes of Leslie and Ruth to create the pieces which will go live in November. So first of all, I have to set the record straight. I have grown up believing that merino wool is from Australia and New Zealand. Now set me straight, Leslie.
Well, yes, most of the merino that's bought and used by fashion companies around the world comes from Australia and New Zealand. But actually, merino is a European breed. Back in the 18th century, we had quite a lot of merinos in the UK. They originated in North Africa, millennia ago, and they were brought by the Romans into Spain and Portugal and gradually moved northwards through Europe. So by the time of the 18th century, there were incredibly good flocks in Spain, Portugal, Saxony, in Germany, and most other European countries, and King George III had some over here. Obviously, we then had Australia developing. The Australians needed a crop and a product that they could send back to the UK. They needed to do something with their farming land. And merino sheep seemed like the perfect solution. So in fact, we shipped our merino growing enterprise from the UK out to Australia. Nobody else in Europe did that. They all retained their flocks of merino. And to this day, Europe has significant flocks of merino, but not the UK. We exported our merino growing to Australia. So what I've done is bring them home. After 200 years, they've come back to the UK, and they're doing very nicely.
So how many do you have? Tell us about the stud.
We have 300.
Right.
They're Australian. They're all Australian. They're brought in by genetic imports,
right,
not live animals.
Okay.
And we have Australian classers working with us who actually help me class the sheep and class the wool. So every year I make sure I'm doing the right thing, and I go back every year, sometimes twice a year, to Australia to source the next round of genetics to make sure I'm getting exactly what I want.
And what is it about merino wool specifically that makes it so popular in terms of fashion?
It's the nadir, if you like, of wool. It's the softest, it's the finest, it's the most multi-purpose in many ways. You can do quite a lot with merino because it's quite a broad church.
Yeah.
You go from ultrafine, which is the really, really fine wool, down to about 12 micron. And we've got some sheep that are 13 micron, very, very fine. Average human hair, by the way, is about 90 to 100 microns, so that gives you an idea. So merino runs from roughly about 12 micron right up to 23. Anything that gets to 24 is no longer classifiable really as merino. But they always classify their merinos by the wool quality, not by the sheep. So if you say to an Australian, "Oh, I've got merinos," they'll look at you and go, "What?"
Do they think you're...
Yeah, and so you have to qualify that. If you say, "I've got superfines," immediately they know what you're talking about because you're talking about a grade of wool within the merino family.
And obviously British weather, I mean, it's just not the best. So other sheep, they really are acclimatising to our ever-changing.
No problem, Ginny, because
And
they
you keep
were
them
a
in the
European
winter.
breed, and
Right.
the genetic makeup of merino means that in Australia they have actually been diversified into animals that will cope better in dry conditions.
Yeah.
The original merinos were designed to cope with wetter conditions. And there are wet areas in Australia, parts of Victoria, parts of New South Wales, Tasmania, and those are the areas I tend to source my genetics from because they are used to high rainfall. So it's not a problem.
So they're out in the summer and indoors.
Yes, they come in the winter, and that's for environmental reasons, not so much for the sheep. It's more because we take great care of our land. And in the winter, if you have stock out wintering on grass and ground, it ends up as a mud bath in very extreme weather events. So for their sake and for the sake of the land, they come in the winter, and in fact, you've only got to open the gate on the day when they're coming in, and they say, "Right, we're in," and it's a dash down the drive and into the barn. And
I love it.
Oh, lovely.
And that leads me to ask, what are their characters like as sheep?
They're very gentle,
Are they?
remarkably gentle. They are very lovable. I've got 300, so I can't say I know everyone.
I was going to say, so you don't name them then?
Oh gosh, no. No, but I do know certain individuals, and they will come across and actively engage with you and actually ask for a tickle.
Really?
Yes, and quite often you'll get one come behind you and just pull your jumper and say, "Hey, what about me?"
I love that.
Which is lovely.
Oh, and you're obviously so fond of them. They are your family. You know,
I get very, very
incredible.
attached to them. Very, very attached. And it's quite difficult. I mean, today, for example, I've got a little lamb. She's not little, really. She's 6 months old. But she's unfortunately got an illness, and she's very poorly. So she's on antibiotics 3 times a day. Right. And I've had to leave her.
And heart-wrenching.
You know, I went down to see her before I left, and my husband's there, and he's looking after her. But a little bit of me is still back there, worrying about her. You know, so it's like that. Yeah. So shepherding is a privilege, not a right, and I regard it as the greatest of privileges to look after my sheep.
So Lady Bamford shows interest in purchasing a flock. I mean, it's not every day you decide to buy a flock. So what's been the process of that, and how has it come about?
Well, I was contacted by her farm manager, I think he's Richard, and he asked some basic questions about what it was all about, and we had a long conversation, and he ended up coming down to the farm. So we had a good walk round and explained, from my point of view, what I required before I would consider selling the sheep, because I sell very, very few. I've only got 2 customers in the UK. Bamford's is one of them, and the other one is a girl in Kent who has another fashion brand. 90% of the animals I sell go to Europe, so I have to be very, very sure that somebody I'm selling to is going to look after them well. I've got a lot invested in these animals.
Yes, of course.
And they're too precious to waste. So I had to be sure that they would be well cared for, and clearly that was fine. And then the shepherd, who's due to look after them, Matt, he came down as well. And Matt and I hit it off straight away, and I thought, yes, the sheep will be fine with Matt. So that's how it happened. And then they came up here in 2019. I'd put them in lamb. I'd already put a ram with them so that they were pregnant when they arrived. And then they had their first lambs in the spring. And then they bought a ram from me for the following season, and they're carrying on breeding.
And
So
off we go.
off
And
you
the
go.
first collection, like I said, will be available to buy from November. So, but Ruth, I want to ask you, because other than merino wool, what are the other options out there? You don't work with merino wool, for instance, do you?
No, we don't work with merino. Herd is actually founded on the blue-faced Leicester breed, which is a native British breed of sheep that came into existence in the mid-19th century. It was originally bred into existence both for meat and wool because it has a good, strong body, but also a very fine fleece. But sadly, with the collapse of the British wool industry in the late 20th century, with the advent of synthetic fabrics and artificial fibres, the wool market for blue-faced Leicester really dropped.
Really? It's just completely worthless to use the wool.
It was for a long time, yes. And what we've done is re-establish that demand and re-establish that value. So buying the fleeces directly from the farmers, so that we can make sure that they benefit directly from the fashion, from the use of it. But actually, because they form such an integral part of the UK sheep farming system, which eventually ends up in a lamb for table, there are still a good number of them in the UK, all of them in the kind of northern uplands and kind of Scottish borders as well, which is where we work.
And what's the best thing about working with wool specifically? Or with sheep?
There's so many amazing things about wool. First of all, it's warm, which is crucial for so many of the different climates around the world. It's also very soft, but technically it's wicking of moisture, it's breathable, it's antibacterial, antimicrobial, which means that it shrugs off stains and odours and needs far less washing, which is fantastic for the environment. And then one of the best things about wool, especially herd wool and wool like the way that Bamford use it, which is undyed, is that you can, at the end of its life, just bury it in the ground.
This is what we're trying to get around to. It's the full circular sort of journey, if you like. You know where it comes from because of the transparency of a brand telling you the story from sheep to shop. And then after because we all tire of pieces or we grow out of them, and I think that's what I certainly as a journalist am trying to say, know where the next kind of the afterlife of your piece or garment will be. So digging a hole in the ground and burying it is the dream, basically. And you really can do that with these pieces.
And it biodegrades naturally and even beneficially for the soil.
But Ruth, I know you have funny facts about sheep, so I have to ask you those. So what's your favourite funny fact?
Well, I just love how different each breed is. They've got very distinct characteristics, just as Leslie was saying. And some will, as merino, be very cuddly and very friendly. Some will spend their entire life trying to escape from fields, be it through hedge or wall or fence, and just running over roads and crossings like real escapologists. But a blue-faced Leicester has this wonderful, sweet habit of flocking together to eat. So they'll sit down with their heads up as if they're kind of having a chat. They've come
very
together
sociable.
for a coffee morning.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, and they're just catching up on the kind of day's goss.
I love that. You did tell me one about referring to them as the biggest Romeos, but maybe that's not for today.
Oh yes, yeah, they're very virulent.
Sorry.
They're very well endowed and virulent.
Very well endowed. I love it.
Yeah.
We'll leave that for there.
Yeah.
For now. But on a more serious note, Ruth, I mean, you see it firsthand. I write about it, but honestly, I want to come and visit how it's all how it all starts off, because what is the hardest part of convincing the consumer that wool is great and that it's not all about cashmere being superior, and shifting that perspective? And I'm going to ask you that as well, Leslie, in a moment.
Yeah, I mean, cashmere is so fine, and I think people who might be intolerant to wool, it's a good alternative to wool on that front because it is a natural fibre. But the problems that cashmere production are creating in Mongolia are really serious, with the overgrazing creating desertification, which is really challenging for local communities. So it is so important to look for alternatives to cashmere. And now that we have merino, we have locally sourced merino, we have locally sourced herd wool, there are viable options out there for merino that are right here. And that provenance, that traceability, that is being that is in the market if you look for it.
Yeah.
You know, I think, you know, events like this, people, you know, understanding where things come from, you know, the work that you do, I do feel like there's a groundswell of interest in locally sourced, fully traceable fibres.
I absolutely agree. It's very hard to find the story behind the creation of a cashmere jumper. And, you know, big high street names selling them for £69. I know everyone's in business, you know, to make money, but I think there will be a shift once I'm afraid it will take some investigative, you know, undercover work. I would love to do it, but I can't. But there's a lot to be said for transparency, and that's why you know, it's an honour to actually work with a brand like Bamford, because you can literally see the story kind of being shaped. Leslie, what do you say? How do we convince people to kind of shift their perspectives from?
Well, I agree with everything that Ruth has just said, and you, Jenny, as well. I mean, cashmere, I actually grow cashmere as well. I have a flock of cashmere goats, so I understand very well the challenges and the differences between the fibres of merino and cashmere. From a very practical point of view, merino or other wool is slightly easier to care for and certainly slightly more long-lived in a garment, because cashmere does pill, cashmere does wear out a little more, and that's due to the construction of the fibre, the way the fibre actually grows on the animal. There's no twist in a cashmere fibre. In a merino fibre or another wool fibre, there's something called crimp, which is a natural wave, which gives you a resilience and a bounce, which allows that fibre to resist compression or abrasion. That's absent in cashmere. So in other words, if you had a cashmere jumper on and you sat here like I'm sitting here now, after a while, doing that, you'd wear a hole in your cashmere jumper. It would take a much longer time for you to wear a hole in your merino or other wool jumper because it's more resilient. So there's that. But I would say I worked in Afghanistan for the American government on a cashmere project out there for a while. And I know from personal first-hand experience that there are very good projects out there. And if you can access that and work directly with suppliers, that's fine. But it's very, very difficult to do that. And certainly generic cashmere produced in Primark, China, Zara, etc. for £69, Tesco's. Yeah. I saw a jumper, M&S. 45, M&S. That is just not the way to buy fibre. No. Neither the goats, nor the herders, nor the land that they are using will be benefiting from that. No. That goes straight into the pockets of the middlemen and the brands who are selling it to you. So please, source carefully, look at the label, and try. If you have to buy cashmere, then buy it somewhere where you know things are being done correctly.
Julia, on to you. I want to finally bring you in. Sorry, we've been chatting away, but talking with a design perspective on this merino collection at Bamford, what's the process from brainstorming and prototypes?
Yeah, so with Bamford, like we've been birthed from this idea of championing natural fibres, and that's something that's very important to us, to be working with consciously sourced natural fibres. And in the same way, when we're working with wool, we'll be looking for certifications to ensure that there's traceability there. When we're working with cashmere, we're looking for SFA certification, which is basically making sure that the animals are cared for, the herders' livelihoods are supported. So whatever natural fibres we're working with, we're making sure that there is
research,
traceability there. And I think, like you started off saying, wool, we have this misconception that wool is a scratchy fibre. We've all had those sweaters passed down from our grandparents that just they give you
shapeless.
And they give you the wrong idea of what a UK wool could actually feel like, and it's actually working with the correct quality of wool in the right application. You can have some beautiful sweaters. So I think we're trying to reshape that idea that actually you can work with a UK grown product and it can be just as luxurious as anything else.
It's all about the design. Trust me, I think if you see a nice piece, you want to buy it. Whether, I'm afraid to say, I don't allow myself to go in Zara, but whether it's in Zara or it's in Bamford, you know, so I think it's the design talent of your team that will also play such a huge part in convincing Joe Blogs or any consumer that this is worthy of their spending power. And I have to say, huge credit to Ruth as well and what you've done with Herd, because you know, yes, it's getting it on the right people, but it comes down to the quality of the design as well as the fabric, and what you're doing is exceptional. So do have a look at Ruth's brand as well. In terms of sheep to shop, like how involved is Lady Bamford? You know, is she checking prototypes? Is she, you know, seeing the sketches come alive, as it were?
Yeah, so she's very involved from the beginning of our design process. So she will be selecting swatches with us. We'll be working on the colour palette. She's always bringing us inspiration of things that she thinks are really interesting. So she's been heavily involved in the Merino project. And I think also working, since Bamford's inception, we've been working with undyed fibres. So that was something, a very strong direction that she wanted to have. So both the bramble hand knit on the left-hand side and our merino pieces on the right are both the undyed natural colour of the sheep.
And it's just 150 pieces, is it?
Yes.
It really is very exclusive. And that's purely because, you know, that's what you've got to work with. I love it. It's not kind of any kind of, exclusive and no one else can have it. It's because that's what you're working with, and in time there will be more, I'm sure.
2 years to accrue enough fleece for 150 pieces. So, it's been a long time coming, but we're really excited to be launching this November.
And Ruth, over to you. What's the favourite process of seeing a piece come together? From seeing the sheep in the field, what's the best bit?
Well, it's been a real eye-opener to visit the farms and to go and experience the Northern Upland and that sheep farming community, because it hasn't actually changed at all for hundreds of years. So you're in the same stone barns that the sheep have been living in and feeding in for hundreds of years, and witnessing the way that the shepherds work with the local communities and the cycle and the seasons of the year that are all based around those cycles of keeping sheep on those landscapes. And so it's an incredibly grounding experience for me to be there and to observe and watch those systems of growth, and really connects me back to why we're doing this, which is ultimately to reconnect consumers with those systems that create fibre, so that they become real again, rather than it just being something that you see in an e-shop or even in a shop, that this is actually where this came from. This came from real people and from real animals and from the soil.
And do you see the farmers taking a greater pride in what they do, or greater satisfaction in what they do? Because
100%.
So often we hear that farmers are forgotten, aren't they?
Yeah,
you know.
no, absolutely. I mean, it's very rare for farmers to actually see the finished product.
Right.
So we'll take the garments and the cardigans and the jumpers to them and say, this is what what Daisy, made. And they're just absolutely blown away. You know, it's so rare for them to be able to make that connection as well from that side.
And you're giving them a voice. Even in a talk like this, you know, it gives them a voice that they perhaps has been forgotten for a while, and it's giving them that momentum again. I wanted to ask Julia, we talk about transparency a lot. It's a buzzword. You will find every brand now using it. I walked past Primark yesterday on Oxford Street. It's all over their windows. I was just like, and it is a buzzword, but really, what does that mean to you at Bamford? How important is it? I mean, it really, like you said, it's in your blood if you work at Bamford.
Yeah, I mean, it's everything. Being able to have complete oversight over the supply chain, and fashion has such a murky supply chain, definitely at the raw materials level. I think there's this shady area where you just can never quite get to the root of where you're sourcing your fibres from, because it is such a huge, long supply chain.
And so many agents involved,
you
know, and they don't always want to declare or share.
Exactly. And I think there's also this disconnect that maybe people aren't quite understanding that their clothes are coming from animals. And you can see your vegetables growing in the market garden today, but actually you can see the clothes growing behind us on the merino sheep as well.
You can name a sheep as well. I love that.
So I think that's huge, being able to pop onto the train, come to the farm and actually see the merino sheep. As well, pop up on the train to Scotland and visit the factory where we're making our pieces. We're working within a 400-mile radius, whereas the average merino supply chain is 18,000 miles.
I mean, that's it's huge. Anyone can understand that.
It's
amazing.
such an exciting project to be able to actually have that full transparency over the entire process. And we know the animal welfare, the animal husbandry, the social impact of the supply chain. It's incredible to be supporting this UK-based industry.
Well, we're very, very excited to see where it goes as well, and hopefully other brands will, take lead. I know, Ruth, you're having a lot of conversations at the moment. Leslie, what does it mean to you? Because you've done this for 16 years, haven't you? And I know it wasn't, you were just saying before, it's not easy to come into this industry. You moved your family, you said, from London.
Yeah.
I mean, you're just like anybody else, but setting out to do a very different kind of pivot to your career.
Yeah.
But
We
what
had
does
an
it mean to
opportunity
you?
to have a complete change of life, and we did. And I think probably a lot of people in the Cotswolds have done precisely that.
Yeah.
They've had a complete life change, particularly as a result of the pandemic. We never meant to farm sheep, it just sort of happened. And I didn't want to do what everybody else was doing fairly unsuccessfully around me, flogging themselves to death for 24/7, not making any kind of income and not looking after the land or the sheep very well in some circumstances. So I decided to go in for merino, and the rest is history, really. We can do it our way. It's cost us a fortune. I've spent many hundreds of thousands of pounds doing what I'm doing, but it's not actually about the money. It's a passion. You'll find the same in Australia. If you meet a bunch of wool growers out there, the passion is palpable. It gets in your blood, and you really just have this wonderful feeling for the sheep and for the wool and for the land that grows them both. We have a tremendous passion.
And a respect.
And respect,
Yeah.
exactly, yes.
I think that's what's so important. As I have young children, and I'm very much teaching them, what they have to be grateful for, and they really roll their eyes at me sometimes. But I think it's important at such an early stage. So all those farm visits that they're doing, it's very important to me, as a mother, that we're sort of teaching. I mean, don't get me wrong, my children still want like fairy outfits, covered in glitter, but they can ask Granny for that. I do want to just really quickly touch upon this notion of carbon footprint. I think it's really confusing, and I just want to ask Julia specifically. Okay, again, it's buzzwords, but they're very important for us to understand if we're to kind of read our fashion and read the labels in the garments that we wear a little more clearly. And how does it work, basically?
Yeah, I think it is something that we will all become a lot more literate in the next few years. I think we're all going to start understanding.
Like food labelling.
Exactly.
The colour wheel. I really want that to be part of, clothes labelling.
Yeah, exactly. I think that we'll start understanding it more, and they'll become more of an industry standard. But we're looking at measuring the carbon footprint of our merino product. So obviously, as I said, reduced transportation that we're working with. We're also pasture-fed year-round, and then in January and April, the sheep will go into the barn, and they're fed a forage-based diet, which is sourced from Daylesford. So we know that the impact on the farm is going to be very minimal, if any.
Full circular.
Exactly. So, and we can also be exploring the carbon sequestration potential within Daylesford, because it is an organic farm. So I think it's important that a lot of brands engage into this conversation. It's the way we're going with COP26. We need to be confronting it. And I think with the Merino project, we have an opportunity to really shout about what we're doing and the potential at Daylesford.
I often find it's so easy, isn't it? It's not someone else's problem anymore, though. Don't you find it's sort of, this is a conversation that a lot of people I work with roll their eyes. In fact, one lady the other said to me, she'd had a drink, but she said, "No one cares, Ginny. Like, you are onto no, like you're not going anywhere with this." I just thought, oh my gosh, let's meet again in 5 years and see where we're going, because it has to become the norm. It has to be how we bring up our children. It has to be how brands behave. And on that note, I'm reading Anya Highmarch's book, Designer in the Accessories Industry, and she said if you could take out the word brand and replace it with the word behaviour, wouldn't that change the way the fashion industry, presents itself? Because I think we all get the brand overview and where it's headed and what their ethos is, but actually we just need to look at their behaviour, and that will tell us a hell of a lot more. So it's quite an interesting kind of point that she makes. Okay, homework for the audience. We're going to wrap things up, but I just wanted to ask each panel member for a buzzword that people should look for going forward if they're going to educate themselves, because it is baffling, and you are experts in your fields and you work with this every day, but what would be your buzzword, Leslie, for someone to look out for?
I think the one I picked really on this is biodiversity. What the heck does it mean? It actually means the natural variability of animals and plants found in one area. In other words, how variable are the numbers of animals and plants? How many species are there? So if I look around this room now, we would say that biodiversity is very low because it's full of Homo sapiens. But actually, if you think about it, it isn't, because I bet you there are flies, spiders, there'll be earthworms underneath us, all sorts of creepy crawlies underneath us. So there's a lot more biodiversity here than just us in the room. And that's something we need to be aware of. You know, people will often say, oh, biodiversity is this, biodiversity is that. Actually, just stop and think about what they're actually saying. Where are they actually referring to, and what are their baselines, and what are their measurements? Right. That is really important. So biodiversity, variability of animals and plants found in a particular area, a country, a planet, a habitat, whatever.
Great. Okay, Ruth, what was yours?
So I chose the word Fibreshed, which is a word that many people may not have actually heard of. But if you are interested in wool, if you're interested in local production and interested in where fashion comes from, it's really something to look into.
Fibreshed, okay.
A Fibreshed. So a Fibreshed is a geographical designation that defines and gives borders to a natural textile resource, which basically means local fibres, local dyes, local people. So the idea, which Bamford are pioneering, which Herd are working with, which Leslie's part of, working with other brands, which basically is the challenge that we face to produce a garment all the way from the soil to the finished garment within a 150-mile radius, which with wool is a huge opportunity for this country, because we have the heritage, we have the facilities, we have the flocks, we have the passion, the expertise, the skills, and ultimately we have the customers.
We do not need to look overseas. We really don't, do we? It's such an interesting point when you actually think we've got it all here. Yeah. We even have the climate, which I've now been corrected in thinking we didn't. Yeah. We just need the customers. And what was yours?
So I've opted for regenerative, and I think this is a buzzword at the moment, and I think it will become into kind of a lot. It will be a lot more understood in the next few years. But it's basically about putting back what you take away from the soil, not just sustaining, but actually improving and farming with the soil's biodiversity in mind. And I think there's lots of movement within the Fibreshed certification to be farming in a regenerative sense, and I think that is the future.
Yeah, I find it very confusing, that one, and I was looking at it this morning as well, and it was producing food and improving the environment at the same time. Yeah. Again, we can do it here. We've been doing it for centuries. We just need to gather the momentum. And so finally, I just wanted to ask you again, everyday tips, what each one of you to improve how we live, how we behave, the weird and the wacky. Ruth, what's your how do you live more sustainably?
Well, here I have to put in a word for seaweed, because I'm a huge fan of seaweed. From sheep to seaweed. So, on your next holiday, consider foraging a bag, taking it home, bathing in it, and then burying it in your garden. It is the most incredible mineral bath for your skin, for your overall health. And then it is a natural fertilizer. There's buckets of it, and it's just lying there waiting, to be repurposed in your life. So never buy fertilizer again, just use seaweed.
Seaweed. Okay, so when we next go on our UK holiday, yes. My husband will love me for that, thanks. Leslie, what was your tip?
Oh, well, I have an opportunity, of course, that most of you don't have, in that I live on a sheep farm, and when you live on a sheep farm, sheep produce quite a lot of sheep berries out at the other end of them. And Sometimes they get stuck on bits of wool as well, and it's not a very pleasant job having to deal with that. But every cloud has a silver lining, and we have just planted a lovely apple orchard. So all of those wonderful gifts of sheep berries and what we call daggings, which are the sort of disgusting bits at the back end of a sheep, they all get gathered up at distance with a nose peg and placed around our apple trees, and we grow the most wonderful apples in Devon. As a result.
My gosh. Extra fruity apples. Julia, what's yours?
So I refuse to throw away any clothing, even the most threadbare, moth-eaten item I will keep
What do you do
hold
with
of.
that?
It just goes into a box until I'm ready to decide how to save it. So either a nice calming Sunday, I'll just do some darning, or it just goes into fabric patches somewhere.
I use a
But
lot
I'm
of mine
a bit of a
for,
hoarder.
instead of a cloth, a cloth, I'll use old fabric, old baby grows particularly. Mine is, I don't go to high street brands that really don't need my money because they're just making so much of it. So I really put the blinkers on and I don't go into the obvious names, and I have saved an absolute fortune. And on that note, I want to say thank you. Thank you to Lady Bamford for allowing us to have this talk here. And thank you to you for coming to listen, because I know there's lots of wonderful treats that might have enticed you otherwise. But mostly, thank you to the panel for sharing your insights, your advice, and really breaking down this story, because it is quite confusing for a lot of people. And I think, it is up to people like us to share the stories, to really remind people of those animals working away, doing what they can to produce their amazing wool, in this case. And a reminder of the farming techniques and knowledge that have gone back for centuries that just need that platform, and a platform like this to really shine. But mostly, I would love to say, read what your fabrics are made of, wear your values. It's all very well to say we're really up for being sustainable, but make that part of how you dress, and wear it with pride as well. You don't need half of what you think you do. But most of all, thank you. And any questions, please come up to us at the end. We thought that might be a much more kind of a nicer way to do it. And, I'm wearing wool. Feel great. So you're wearing wool. Wear more wool. That's all I can say. Thank you very much.